Last night, I woke up to find her standing by the window, just staring out. When I blinked, she turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're late, Gideon," she said softly, using a name I don't remember ever telling her. That's when the unease settled in, cold and sticky, like ink spreading under my skin. My name is Mark. My wife, Julia, and I have always shared a playful hobby, role-playing. We make entire evenings out of pretending to be strangers in cafes or inventing new identities while cooking dinner. It started out harmless, a flirtation with fantasy to break the dull rhythm of our lives. Julia adores creating characters so much that sometimes, in those moments, I barely recognize the woman I married. She's always had a flair for it, slipping effortlessly into whatever persona she chooses. But lately, something's changed. It's not just the obvious, like her calling me Gideon instead of Mark. It's subtler. For instance, every now and then, she reads lines from our invented scripts long after I've stopped responding, as if she's forgotten we're just playing. We had dinner at the usual spot yesterday, our small downtown diner where the waitstaff knows us by name. Julia greeted the waitress not as herself, but as Ivy, a character who supposedly just moved to the city. At home, I noticed the small white vase on the mantel had shifted an inch to the left. Nothing big, but enough to catch my eye. And during conversation, Julia suddenly changed details about our shared history, insisting that we had first met not 10 years ago, but 2. "It feels like yesterday I moved in," she whispered, tracing her fingers over the kitchen counter as if it, too, was new to her. I told myself it was just the game getting deeper. That's all it was. We've pushed the boundaries before, slipping into characters that lasted a few hours or a night. But now, the lines between Julia and her roles blur. She lingers too long, with a smile that hides something else. A quiet, distant shadow behind those eyes. Yesterday evening, as we sat on the couch, she looked around and said, almost casually, "This house is still so strange to me." It's funny how a place can feel like someone else's home. It was the first time she referred to our house that way, as if she had moved in recently, like a stranger lurking inside a memory that doesn't belong to her. And I realized then that I might be the stranger. At first, I brushed it off, her forgetting the little plans we'd made, or the stories we laughed over just days ago. Maybe she was tired, I told myself. But the forgetfulness grew sharper, like cracks spreading across ice. One morning, she asked me if I'd ever shown her our honeymoon photos. I froze. "We haven't been on a honeymoon," I said, slowly. She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and said I was joking. But she wasn't. I checked the photo album on the shelf. It was empty. Later, she insisted we had spoken about a dinner party we supposedly hosted last weekend. I searched my memory. Blank. "No, I don't remember any party," I replied. She shook her head, confused, and muttered, "You were so charming. Everyone loved you." The way she said it, the tone, was different. Softer, a little distant, as if recalling someone I didn't know. This small fracture in our history unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Was I losing my mind? Or was something unspoken, creeping into the edges of our reality? I began doubting my own recollections, questioning every word, every smile, every familiar touch. The spaces between us felt colder, stretched thin by an invisible tension. At midnight, the house seemed alive with quiet whispers I could almost catch but never quite understand, just beyond hearing. One night, as I passed the hallway mirror, I caught a flicker in the corner of my eye, a shadow darting behind her figure. I spun around, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. Yet on the floor, a single playing card lay face down. The Queen of Spades. We didn't own cards. Her voice changed too, slipping from warmth to something sharper in moments. Sometimes she called me by names I never heard before, and sometimes by names I did, but with a strange weight behind them, like there was another story she wanted me to remember, one I couldn't find. That evening, I confronted her gently. "Do you remember when we first played those games?" She looked at me blankly, then shook her head. "I don't know what you mean." Her words hit me hard, a denial I wasn't prepared for. Later, as I sat alone in the dim living room, a cold breeze slipped through the cracked window, carrying with it a faint, broken whisper of my name. I stood up abruptly, scanning the room. On the couch, the blanket she always left folded was now unfolded, rumpled as if someone had been sitting there just moments ago. I reached out to touch it, and my fingers brushed something cold hidden beneath, a thin, faded photograph I didn't recognize. The edges were burnt. Tears of fear welled up in my eyes as a chilling thought crept through my mind. What if the game we played wasn't pretend at all? She stayed in character longer now, hours, sometimes spilling from one identity to the next without pause, as if she were browsing through personas like clothes in a closet. This morning, she called herself Miranda, a scholar from a crumbling library in a forgotten city, one I'd never heard her mention before. Her voice was soft but firm, her eyes sharp and distant. She described her life with such vivid detail, the books she read, the knowledge she unearthed, the enemies she fled, that I couldn't decide if I was watching a play or slipping further from reality. When I tried to call her by her real name, she flinched, eyes darkening for a moment before she replied, not with warmth but cold dismissal. "No, I'm not your wife," she said quietly, as if the idea offended her. "You don't know me." That denial carved deep cracks in my mind. I asked about events we both lived through, our first date, the house we bought last year, but she claimed none of it had ever happened. "You're imagining things," she said, her tone flat as she turned away. Yet every evening, the mysterious playing card, the one with the cracked mirror design, would appear on the kitchen table, sometimes moved, sometimes hidden in plain sight. Shadows stretched and shifted oddly behind her, whispering words just out of my hearing. It was as if reality itself bent to her presence, twisting and reshaping around her shifting identities. Contradictions piled up like ominous clouds. "We never played that game," she insisted when I whispered about our old role-playing nights. Yet her speech was peppered with phrases and names from it, names she invented with frightening conviction. She spoke about secret missions, forgotten wars, and lives lived across impossible lifetimes, all unfamiliar to me. I tried to reason, to grasp some sense of normalcy, but her blank, unwavering denial left me hollow. The walls closed in, and I began to wonder if I was the one losing grip on the past, or if she was something beyond my comprehension. Yesterday, as I sat across from her at the kitchen table, nerves tight like a violin string, she suddenly smiled, a crooked, knowing smile, and said, "You were just about to ask who I really am, weren't you?" I blinked, shaken. "How do you—" She held up a finger, silencing me. "We already said all that, just minutes ago. Don't you remember, darling?" I stared at her, mind scrambling for the conversation she claimed had happened. But it never did. The room plunged silent except for her steady breathing, her eyes gleaming with a secret she refused to share. The woman before me was someone else, or perhaps never was the wife I thought I knew. And as the shadows lengthened, curling tightly around us, I realized the terrifying truth. Whatever game she plays now, it isn't pretend. It's real. It has to be. It started subtly at first. The glass I left on the table was never where I'd set it. Books my own would fall from shelves, scattering like they'd been pushed by unseen hands. Each time she would look at me with those cold, unreadable eyes and whisper, "Why do you keep doing this to me?" As if I were the culprit. When I protested, insisting I hadn't touched anything, she'd laugh, a low, bitter sound that didn't belong to my wife anymore. "You think reality is so simple?" she said one night, her voice twisting like a knife in my mind. Then the strange comments began. At the grocery store, a neighbor glanced at me and muttered something that made my skin crawl. "He doesn't remember. Nobody does, least of all her." I blinked, but when I turned to respond, she was gone. Even my so-called friends dropped vague hints, cryptic phrases about shadows and lies, as if warning me or mocking my ignorance. One evening, walking home, I heard whispers in the wind, carrying fragments of half-phrases I couldn't make sense of. "Not what you think. She's already changed. Look closer." The house itself seemed to join the conspiracy. Photographs on the walls subtly warped, faces blurred and shifted when I wasn't looking. In one picture of us from our wedding day, her smile twisted, cold and unfamiliar, eyes darker, a stranger staring back at me. My phone buzzed with messages I never sent or received, sentences that contradicted everything I knew, texts from her that spoke about places we had never been, and moments yet to come. Paranoia swallowed me whole. I found myself questioning every memory, every sensation. Was this the wife I loved, or some fragmented phantom created by my fraying mind? One night, sitting in the dark, she turned to me suddenly and said, "Tomorrow, you'll regret leaving the door unlocked. If only you could hear what I hear." The words pierced me, not because they were threats, but because they revealed knowledge no one could have. How did she know what I was thinking? What had I done or failed to do? My heart thudded harder when I finally noticed it. Partly hidden under a pile of letters on the kitchen counter, a legal document bearing her name. But the name wasn't hers. It was another, one I did not recognize. Next to it, an ID card reflected strange and impossible truth. The photo was hers, or almost hers, but the expression was hollow, eyes glassy, a complete stranger wearing her face. I held the paper with trembling hands, a chill crawling down my spine. She looked over my shoulder, smiling then, a creature of shadows slipping between roles, between realities. "You don't remember?" she whispered. "But I do." I sat across from her in the dim kitchen light, my hands trembling on the worn oak table. The house was unnervingly quiet, as if holding its breath. I decided I had to confront her, calmly this time, with the pieces of reality slipping through my fingers like sand. "We need to talk," I said, voice barely steady. Her eyes narrowed, not with anger, but something colder, detachment, maybe even amusement. She folded her arms and leaned back, as if this was all a game she was winning. "What's there to talk about?" she replied smoothly. "You keep changing stories. You're imagining things again." A shiver ran down my spine. The moving objects, the voices, the photos that don't match what I remember. What about the documents? The IDs with your face but another name? How do you explain that? She smiled softly, almost kindly. "You agreed to this long ago. You just don't remember. Sometimes people block out things to protect themselves." Without breaking eye contact, she reached for the drawer and pulled out a battered leather journal. The worn pages were filled with neat handwriting, dates, times, notes. Next to it lay a battered recorder, its tiny red light blinking steadily. "I've been keeping track," she said. "Every conversation, every disagreement, every unusual moment. You can listen if you want. There's a timestamp for every little detail, and you've never once questioned what I tell you. Not until now." My stomach twisted as I took the recorder. The first playback crackled, her voice clear and calm, narrating things I couldn't remember saying. Words and promises I had no recollection of agreeing to, moments of tenderness mixed with fear. I forced myself to listen, but my thoughts tangled in the shadows creeping at the edges of the room. "You've been slipping," she continued softly. "Between realities, names, memories. I'm here, the constant, but even I can't always hold your pieces together." She glanced around, eyes flickering briefly, just for a heartbeat. Something not human, something that didn't belong. The walls themselves seemed to lean in closer as I struggled to hold on to what I understood. Her voice was steady, but beneath it, I heard faint whispers, echoing from the corners. The photos I once trusted, the truth I thought I knew, unraveled before me. The reality she described felt as cold and real as the leather journal in my hands. Finally, she pressed a photo into my palm, a picture of us, or something like us. But beneath our faces, scrawled in shaky ink, was a signature I didn't recognize, a name I couldn't place. "This is what you wanted," she whispered. "This is what you promised. If you don't remember, it's only because you're still caught in the past, haunted by what you cannot face." I looked up, and she was smiling, not with love, not with warmth, but with the unsettling certainty of something that had waited far too long for me to believe her, and now had won. She didn't look at me like a wife anymore. Her eyes felt like cold mirrors, reflecting nothing of the man I used to be. "You're not him," she said softly, her voice a whisper, but carrying a weight that crushed the air between us. "Not anymore." I stumbled back, heart pounding, breath shallow and ragged. "What do you mean? I'm your husband. I've always been—" She cut me off with a shaking, almost amused smile. "You're someone else. A role you played. Names you've forgotten. Faces you wore before. Michael, David, Samuel. Each one wiped clean, rewritten." Her words tangled into my thoughts like thick smoke, choking out any certainty. "That's impossible. I remember only this life." She moved to the kitchen table and pulled out another sheaf of papers, some yellowed and brittle, some sharp and new. "Look at this," she said, sliding them closer. "Letters, diaries, promises you made, names you signed your soul to, names that aren't yours." My hands trembled as I sifted through, the ink blurring like water on glass. Then the strange objects caught my eye. A cracked antique watch ticking backwards, an old glove stained with something dark, a child's doll with hollow eyes staring aggressively from the corner of the room. Things I never owned. Things that twisted familiar space into nightmare shapes. Her eyes darkened, voice dropping into a cool monotone. "Remember this conversation? You won't believe it yet, but it's tomorrow." Before I could answer, she began reciting words I hadn't spoken, lines trembling with fear and confusion. "I don't know who I am, who you are. Help me understand." Her voice cracked and faltered, and for a moment she was no longer her, but a stranger trapped in skin too thin. I reached out, desperate to anchor myself, but she stepped back, calm and detached. "You keep forgetting who you were. It's safer that way." The walls seemed to bend, shadows crawling like liquid beneath the flickering kitchen light. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a cage. And she was the jailer, the architect of my unraveling mind. "Who am I?" I whispered, my voice breaking against the cold void. But she didn't answer. Instead, she placed the recorder on the table and pressed play. My voice, my very soul, and spilling from the tiny speaker, confessing things I had never said, promising things I never made. Slowly, horrifyingly, I realized I was a ghost trapped in someone else's script, a marionette tangled in threads only she could see. What if none of this was ever real? The question echoed, louder and louder, crashing through the shards of my shattered identity. And as the laughter I didn't recognize, hers or something beyond, filled the room, I understood with a cold certainty. I was lost, and nothing I knew could be never pretend, she said softly. And in never pretend, she said softly. And in her voice I heard no trace of the woman I thought I knew, only a stranger delivering a decree. All those names, those promises, they weren't fabrications for a game. You agreed. You always agreed, even if you forgot. I blinked, searching for the man I was supposed to be, but he slipped further away with each moment. The walls around me breathed, shrinking and stretching like the skin of some living beast. The photographs on the mantel warped, faces blurring into one another until they dissolved into shadows. Objects I'd claimed as my own twisted into grotesque shapes, poisoning the rooms I once called home. She offered me one last recording. My voice calm, assured, confessing details I had no memory of. Oaths, binding me to roles I'd never chosen but could no longer deny. The sound echoed behind my eyes, embedding itself like a worm burrowing into flesh. Was this a confession or a verdict? Was I ever truly myself, or had the man I believed I was been erased long ago, replaced by this phantom scripted by her hand? "You play the parts because you must," she whispered, stepping closer, her breath chilling the space between us. "You came here willingly once, didn't you? To forget, to be someone else, to escape. But the cost was to lose the self you clung to." I wanted to scream that this was a nightmare, a cruel trick, but my voice faltered, swallowed by the endless maze that the house had become. The floor beneath me shifted, tilting, as if inviting me to fall deeper into the abyss of forgotten names and fractured memories. I tried to grasp a thread of truth, but it dissolved like smoke through trembling fingers. She reached out, hand steady, offering a collection of papers with new names, new promises I had yet to learn. "Tell me," she said, the faintest smile curving her lips. "What name would you like to try next?" And in that moment, I realized I couldn't remember the one I started with.